So, and all these things we want to measure. Right, so we measure aspects of collective action, we measure water quantity, we measure water quality, and we measure livelihood, and we measure biodiversity. Right, so these are all aspects of the project that we plan to do. Right, and that is hypothesis of Curvebend. It is bending the curve of biodiversity loss, making sure biodiversity doesn't keep declining but recovers again because of collective action. But then you need to connect. In this case, how does collective action lead to this? Right, this is for the water aspect. We can make a similar schedule for savanna, right, where we say collective action, people work together, they restore savanna. If they restore savanna, there's better grazing for wildlife and also for livestock, and we get improvement in livelihood and also more biodiversity, right? But this is today about the water part, right? So collective action, we still need to discuss this further, right? How to measure, right? You want to know, we want some quantitative measure here, for example, even we can use the village as a unit of organization. We can say, how do you measure? To what degree is the village cooperating, right? So is the village working very collectively? Are they unified in their view? Or are they fighting each other a lot, right? Do they have a lot of discussion? For example, here, I already heard, it's of course confidential, like Olorien, they always agree, or Kenya, they always agree with each other. Although Nuwas maybe a little less so, right? Although Nuwas, they always have discussion, right? And they don't agree even where to clear and where to do, right? So this we can quantify to what degree is there a strong agreement from joint operation of the village. In Kenya, it is for individual land owners, right? Every land person has their own field, and some of them are very active in cooperating with each other, and others they just want to stay alone, right? So this year, I still put a question mark, so because we still need to define also for this setting, right? The water quantity is what we start doing now today, right? So if you look at the river, and you have there's a river like this, right? And it has so here's the trees. This is the cross section of the river, right? And sometimes the river level is low, or sometimes it's here. It can even overflood, and it can even be dry, right? So the level of the river is varying, as you know, right? So what we want to know is an important variable, which is the discharge rate. Cubic meter per day. Right, so cubic meter is a volume, this much. Cubic meter is 1000 liter. Right? You can also say cubic meter per day, you can also say 1000 liter per day. We want to know how much water is flowing through the river, right? Because that is your measure for discharge, and that is your measure for water quantity, right? So you want to know, is the river dry, if it's flowing a little bit, because what we expect is we want to improve these kind of things. There's different rivers that come together, right? This is like the case like with Sariani. So Sariani is a site like this here, right? And then this we call the watershed, right? So the watershed is the total area that is drained by a river, right? So the better you plan, and if you have a critical water point here, you should plan actually that this river keeps flowing, right? And that the river keeps flowing, that it's clean, and that it improves biodiversity and improves livelihood, right? So this discharge, how we measure, so you have the width of the river, right? Just how wide it is, right? We also have if we make a fixed point here, we also have the depth of the river, right? And we also have, that comes towards us, we also have. So what we want to do is make a profile of the river, right? And a profile means that we look at the riverbed and we look at fixed distances. And we measure the depth, right? So, because what we want is actually to know this. This is what we call the cross sectional area, right? So we want to know how large that area is, because if you know how large this area is and you know the flow, right, then you multiply the flow by the area and you have the discharge, right? So you know how much water is going through the river, because you know how large. It's like, you can think of it as a pipe. If you have a thin pipe, only little water can flow through it. If you have a big pipe, a lot of water can flow through it, right? And how much water can flow through it, you can measure if the pipe is completely full, right? It's just determined by the flow rate of the water, right? If the pipe is full and if the water flows slowly, then you have a fixed discharge rate. If it flows faster, because then the area is fixed, right? So we have to measure the flow rate and we have to measure this cross-sectional area, and we do that by taking depth readings, and we can also measure the width, right, which is the check of this. So having the total width, and then, for example, every meter we stick the pole in the river. Ideally you do from a bridge or something like that. And then this flow we need to measure at different levels of the river, because the key thing now we need to know is the relation between the level of the river and the flow of the river, right? So if we measure the flow at different levels of the river, so for example, today we go, maybe the river is high and we measure, this is the level, so that is this vertical level, right? I call it depth, but let's call it level. So today maybe the river is here and it has a certain flow. Maybe another day the level is here and it has a certain flow. So typically, if the level of the river goes down, the flow rate of the river goes down, right? If the river is low, then it flows slowly. If the river is high, it's flowing very fast. So that one is for the level. We have the blue pole, which is measuring this profile, right, the depth. And we have the flow meter for determining how fast the river is flowing, right? So then we know all these things. Is the water really clean? Is it good for drinking, right? This is also what water authorities do or should do. They don't do in Wasso, but they should check these things to make sure that the water is, for example, safe to drink, right? And then on this side, we do mods which is what we did last night, right? With the so-called lead bucket. And we do plant diversity, and our equipment is in million. Just plots in the field. And we do what's called aquatic macrofauna. So we catch the small animals that live in the water, right? If you have a bucket of water, you often see animals swimming in the water, right? That is what you call the macrofauna. It is the animals that are big enough to see with your naked eye. And this we do with net fetching in microscope. And I think we might also do dragonflies. And all the sound is recording. And many of the birds, as you know, every bird has a different sound, right? Often you can identify which bird it is from the sound. So it's also a good new way. Instead of you have to stand there for hours, you put the audio mod, and then you can listen back. And not ourselves, but there's computer software, AI, you know about AI, artificial intelligence, right? AI can actually recognize the sound, and when you show the sound file to the AI, it can say, well, I think it's that bird. The same with the mods. We take a photo and we upload it to the AI, and the AI is saying, well, I think it's this moth, or it's this